Welcome to Kirkcaldy Civic-Society's first ever virtual heritage walkabout. This one covers the Gallatin and Sinclairton areas and a wee bit of Pathhead. We commence the walk at the very top of Roslin Street, work our way down Sinclair Street, and eventually we finish up down at Ravenscraig Castle. Can I look at a wee bit of the history of this? Back in 1470, negotiations took place between the Sinclair family and James III. James III ultimately handed over the lands of Ravenscraig Castle and its environs, which was actually quite a big piece of territory, to William Sinclair, and in return received the earldom of Orkney, and it was at this point that Orkney and Shetland became part of Scotland. Okay, let's move on. Okay, we commence our walk right at the modern tip of the Gallatin. Previously, the Gallatin stretched even further north than it does at the moment. That was due to so much was knocked down. It was demolished when the new dual carriageway was built, which became then part of the new road to Glenrothes. Where we are is at the Gallatin end of Randolph Road, and what you see in the picture, very importantly, is a tram, and that tram belonged to the Weems and District Tramway Company, and that company started its service in August of 1906. On this next slide, we have an entirely different tram company. This is the tram system which was run by Kirkcaldy Corporation Trams, and it predated the Weems and District Company's trams by about 3.5 years. And indeed, the picture that you see is the opening ceremony on the 28th of February 1903, when the great and good of Kirkcaldy were jammed onto the trams themselves. What we see in this photograph is again one of Kirkcaldy's trams, but also in the background what we have is the turret bar, which was one of Kirkcaldy's famous landmarks for many, many decades. Sadly, it of course has been demolished again for road widening purposes. As far as this slide, and indeed the next slide, we are at the corner of Roslin Street and Oswald Road. Oswald Road was the road which was built from the Gallatin through what was called West Gallatin, because at one time Gallatin and West Gallatin were two different hamlets, and away along towards the estate which was owned by the Oswald family, and of course Dunnekere, what became known as Dunnekere House Hotel, but previously was called Dunnekere House. You notice that in slide 5 and in the subsequent slide that there have been a number of different businesses on that site over the many years, and of course nowadays there is a Stephen's Bakery shop. Very close to this junction, just a wee bit up further along Oswald Road, we had a very important building, and this building was the Gallatin depot for the trams. and as you can see in the picture, there are a number of the trams which were housed there overnight, and of course repairs were done from that site. You see a number of staff also in the photograph. Immediately opposite Oswald Road, we had a wide part which was originally where the Galton Market was, and for many years there was a pub and restaurant called the Top of the Town, and of course now that has been replaced by the new business, dining rooms. This location here was where the terminuses both of the Kirkcaldy and Wemyss tram systems were, and if you wanted to be transported from any part of Kirkcaldy to Leven, then you got the tram to the Galatown, and then you joined a different tram, a Wemyss tram, and you headed out of Kirkcaldy in the direction of the Wemyss and eventually to Leven. Temporarily we pop round to the back of the building and you see a previous photograph of the back when it was the top of the town. The road which we went down was called Pool Lane. Pool Lane was the lane that locals took their pails and they went to a well and they filled up with water on a daily basis. Also down Pool Lane there was literally a pool, a small loch which had very, very close to it as well a tile and brickworks. As well as that, there was also a quarry which supplied the raw materials, the clays, for these brickworks, and of course subsequently for the potteries when potteries became a big thing in Kirkcaldy. Down this lane nowadays there are playing pitches, local authority playing pitches, but at one time then there was greyhound racing on this site as well. Okay, now we come a wee bit further down Roslin Street and across the road there is a location called the Elbow Room. The Elbow Room is still an extremely successful business, but for older people they will remember that the Elbow Room hosted Kirkcaldy Folk Club in the 1970s when all the very best performers from Scotland and beyond used to play. Slightly further down we come to the part of the road which leads down to Dysart. Remember that this area was part of not just Earl of Roslin's estate, but was also part of Dysart parish. So that road, which is now called Windmill Road, took you down to the borough of Dysart itself. If we look closer, what we will find at this point is two streets. The street on the left is called Doctor's Row, which was named after a Dr. Hastie who lived and practised from, and also the other small street is School Lane because an early Galton school was present at the bottom of that lane. The next two photographs are premises which are regrettably is now empty. The history behind that is that the Royal Artillery Association and Gunner Club was first formed in Bank Street in Kirkcaldy and moved up to its, at that time, new premises in School Lane. Regrettably, the Gunner Club, the Gunners as people used to call it, is now closed because it was starting to struggle financially. The next three photographs cover a small lane which is on the other side of the street. That is Seaforth Lane. This small lane has had houses built on it quite recently, modern houses built on it, and also there is a factory. That factory was Mackenzie's Malt Works, which was originally established in 1884 and was closed by 1928. That building is now used by Kingdom Amateur Boxing Club. The next four photographs cover something entirely different. These are Kirkcaldy Ice Rink. The ice rink, which is now called Fife Ice Arena, was built on the site of an old rope works. It was owned in 1938 by Sir Robert Lockhart. Megan Taylor, the Olympic and World Skating champion, gave a gala performance on the opening night. The classical Art Deco building of the 1930s is involved with skating, ice hockey, because that's the home of Fife Flyers, and of course curling. The European Curling Championships were held in here in 1982. The gate pillars have the words ice and rink. Close by this, facing Roslin Street, was the Galton Church, which opened in 1877, with the hall, originally the main building, situated north of the church. In 1854, this was at first a mission congregation from Dysart Free Church. The church closed in 1977, the congregation joining Singleton Church, and the building was demolished in 1980. The church hall lasted a little longer, having been the Palladium Picture House from 1925 to 1950, and later the Carpet Store before being demolished around 1990. Okay, now we're going to change the theme a wee bit. The next part of the walk is going to cover Kirkcaldy's industrial past, and indeed the next four slides will cover one very, very important part of Kirkcaldy's industrial past, which was pottery. The Gallatin area had three potteries at one time, and of course there are no potteries left now. The first picture you see contains the Civic-Society plaque, which is an indication of where the Fife pottery was, which was owned by Robert Hearn and Son at one time. But very, very importantly, this pottery produced the world famous Weems ware, and indeed the key person there was the chief designer, Carol Nicola. Some of the Weems ware products, of course, have gone on to sell for substantial sums and are extremely well internationally regarded. The next photo after that is of the current Royal Bank of Scotland building, That site contained a pottery at one time and also a linen mill. Okay, the next part we'll move on to, we'll talk much more about linen manufacture. Okay, as far as linen is concerned, Kirkcaldy was a very large linen manufacturer and also a flax spinning manufacturer, which of course is related. It also had a substantial bleaching and dyeing industry, which was also associated with it. The particular linen mill that we are going to highlight is the one which is up Park Road. That factory is called the Hockley Muir factory. Thankfully that factory was a listed building and has now been saved and is now flats. The building itself was owned by the Blythe family, and the modern connection is that John Blythe, who owned and ran the building in the early 20th century, was the grandfather of the British politician Michael Portillo. And indeed, Michael remembers well coming to Kirkcaldy for his holidays when he was younger every year and staying down in Wilby House, which was the family house down in Loughborough Road. This slide was taken from Viewforth Street and looks towards Roslyn Street, or the junction of Roslyn Street and St Clair Street, and you can see Hockley Muir factory and its chimney in the distance. But the next theme is that of cinema, because what you also see in the picture is Carlton Picture House, which was one of 8 picture houses which Kirkcaldy has had over about a century. The important aspect that people remember from the Carlton Cinema was not just that it was a picture house, but it was also where the Beatles played in the early 60s. And we have a slide of exactly that taking place. Regrettably, attendances at picture houses went downhill in the 1960s. Many of them became bingo halls, and as also happened with many cinemas in Kirkcaldy, many of them were burnt down by fires in the 1970s, of which the Carlton was one of these. Subsequently, of course, it was demolished and it is now a set of flats. What the Civic-Society hopes to do in the near future is to install a plaque to the Carlton Picture House and also the Beatles playing there in the early 1960s. We are now standing at the crossroads of Roslyn Street, St Clair Street, Park Road and Viewforth Street. We see a line of houses. The ones on the left-hand side, of course, have subsequently been demolished. And a wee bit further down the street, you see a low building. That was one of the original weavers' cottages, which has been renovated. St Clair Street has a number of these low-lying cottages which were thatched at one time, but of course have been subsequently brought up to modern standards. The next 2 slides show some urban art, where Cairn Street used to join St Clair Street. The urban art has been renewed on more than one occasion, and the ground has been landscaped and is certainly a vast improvement on how things used to be. Our next two slides show one of Kirkcaldy's listed buildings, a C-listed building. Its architectural style is Second Empire Pavilion style. This building used to be one of Kirkcaldy's many co-op buildings, and on the second slide you can see that this building was established in 1891, and a very familiar co-op sign, which is a beehive. Okay, we've now walked a considerable distance down St Clair Street, and we reach what is called Mackenzie Street, and on this slide you see the factory, which is still working, which is the factory of Peter Greggs, a linen manufacturer, and indeed they created the black linen for the Scottish tapestry, great tapestry, which at one time was exhibited in Kirkcaldy galleries. In terms of linen, Kirkcaldy and indeed Pathhead and Singleton had a considerable number of linen manufacturers. I'll just run through very, very quickly a list of some of the names. Blythe, whom I've already mentioned, McLaren, Westwater, Wisherton Island, Peter Greggs, which is this building, Lumsden, Speedy, and there are others on top of that. Linen was huge in Kirkcaldy in terms of manufacture. This slide is the road end for Aitken Street, and again Aitken was another one of the manufacturers in this area of Kirkcaldy. Across the street, the other side of St Clair Street, the next slide shows again one of these low-lying single-storey buildings, which is a weaver's cottage from the past. Then we have the restaurant and chip shop, which is the Jolly Friar, which has changed name quite recently. Then we have the department store called Rejects, which many people will remember as having been Andrew Hutt's before that, and that is an extremely popular local department store. Okay, we've now passed Rejects, and then there is a small gap towards the car park. The building that we see here is one of the many, many denominations churches in Kirkcaldy. This belongs to the Kirkcaldy Methodist Church. Okay, we're just about to have a wee bit circuitous route. We're going to go down the path into the car park beside Rejects. In this area there were many factories, both linen manufacturers and linoleum manufacturers, because Kirkcaldy had quite a lot of linoleum as well, and of course was very, very much a global leader. This particular picture and the next picture was one of the linoleum manufacturers, which subsequently became Meikle Johns, which made golf trolleys in more recent times. Of course, all this has now been demolished and replaced by modern flats. We walk along Junction Road back to Sinclair Street again. And of course this was always a very busy junction, Sinclair Street with Factory Road with Loughborough Road. And one of the first set of traffic lights appeared at this junction. So these next 5 photographs show each of the corners of this crossroads. One of the most substantial buildings indeed is the bank building, which was on one of the 4 corners with some excellent architectural features, which is not uncommon in terms of banks built in the late 19th century and the 20th century. Okay, temporarily back to our the tram part of the heritage. We have in the first photograph a tram which is turning down from Sinclair Street into Factory Road, and the other photograph is the tram heading down towards Sinclair Street, but down towards Nether Street. The next 3 slides, keeping a transport theme, indicate a installation of a device which measures air pollution, and if you want to check on the quality of air at this point, then you can use the QR code which is on the cabinet of the device itself. So that is just a wee bit further down from the Factory Road traffic lights on the left hand side. The next few slides are very, very much continuing this transportation theme. The first one is the facade, the frontage to, as it says, the North British Railway Station. This was Sinclairtown Station, which was one of 3 Kirkcaldy stations: Kirkcaldy, Sinclairtown and Dysart. The line was opened in 1847. In the early days, the station was actually on the other side of Sinclair Street and subsequently moved to the side that you see in the picture. Regrettably, both Sinclairtown Station and Dysart Station fell foul of the Beeching report in the 1960s and were closed. The slide, one of the slides indicates an old steam train which was in Sinclairtown Station. The next photograph after that shows a Bundy clock. A Bundy clock were in abundance at one time. They were a means of being able to track the trams as they continued through Kirkcaldy, and the drivers would put keys into these clocks. That particular clock is down very close to Commercial Street, and indeed, although you can't quite see it in the picture, the final one of these slides indicates a tram right at the opening to Commercial Street, and the Bundy clock was towards the left of the building on the left hand side. Okay, we're going to deviate again a wee bit. We're going to go along Commercial Street, another one of Kirkcaldy's very interesting buildings. This particular building is the Feuars Arms. The Feuars were indeed the Pathhead Feuars. These are people that feud their properties from the local owner, and the local owner at that time were the Oswald family. So, as is indicated, the Fewers Arms pub, original Victorian pub, it calls itself, established in 1859, and that's an A-listed building. What is very, very good to see is going into the male toilets, if you dare, and see the excellent tiling which has taken place in that building. Our next picture is a wee bit further along from there. That is one of Kirkcaldy's two congregational churches. The other congregational church, of course, is in the west end of Kirkcaldy High Street. This is the Pathhead one. The next photograph is almost two for the price of one. In the foreground is the graveyard of the Pathhead Fewers, and it has a number of very interesting graves of individuals who stayed in this area, and is very and is something which is on the walks themselves. We are able to get the key and go inside it and explore these graves. The backdrop is, of course, what was the A-listed building of Nairn's linoleum factory, with a very, very distinctive set of elongated windows. Regrettably, though, this building has been demolished. Very briefly, the next slide shows one of the very distinctive gravestones which is in the Pathhead Fewers graveyard. And onwards to our last three slides. From Pathhead Fewers graveyard, we walk down to Nether Street and along, and we come to a very, very familiar landmark in Kirkcaldy, which is Ravenscraig Castle. Ravenscraig Castle, which was built in 1460 by James II. James II built it very, very much as a defensive castle, which was able to have cannon as the artillery, which was becoming extremely prevalent at that time. Subsequently, James II died when he was blown up by one of his cannons at a battle down in the Borders near Floors Castle. James III subsequently sold on Ravenscraig Castle to the Sinclair family, as I indicated near the beginning of the talk, in 1470. Although it is in a ruinous condition at the moment, it is owned by the local council, but the custodians are Historic Environment Scotland, and we're in good contact with them because we would really, really like to see Ravenscraig Castle opened as a tourist attraction in the near future. In the final slide of the castle, what you also see is the edge of what is called Sinclairton Fewers graveyard, which also has one or two interesting graves in it of local industrialists who were Fewers of the Sinclair family. Okay, folks, that's the virtual walkabout. This is our very first attempt to create one of these virtual walkabouts. I hope that this will be the first of many which we will create, and indeed may I suggest that I will endeavour to improve on this one as well. But the next walk would have been on Sunday the 24th of May, which is the Lincoln and Inverteal walk. But given the restrictions of the COVID-19 lockdown, my suggestion is that we were unlikely to have that walk, and we will endeavour to create a virtual one of that walk too. And again, that should be a very interesting experience.